Good evening. My name is Crowley, James Crowley, of Jim and Parker's excellent podcast, and welcome to the special commemorative series detailing the 60-year cinematic legacy of British secret agent James Bond 007, Bond-tober. Here we are at the start of the new millennium, and not only was there a new James Bond movie coming, it was the 40th anniversary of the series on screen. So producers Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli advertised the film as something to be cherished, something special, something just for the fans. Now, is that quite what the fans got? Well, not entirely. But for a 7-year-old like me in 2002, it was very engaging, and of course it was made just for me, with over-the-top stunts, over-the-top writing, over-the-top story and acting. So for me it was quite a thrill. In fact, I would like to tell a little bit of a story. In 2002, my brother and I had seen the ads on TV, and we were getting very excited to go see it, and our parents were very stoked to see it as well. But of course, it was always just a matter of, we only really go to the movies on weekends if we weren't busy or tired, and we never really went during the weeknights because obviously they were school nights. But I remember very vividly the night we went to go see Die Another Day. It was November of 2002. I think it was shortly after it opened. And one night we were in our home, and it was a school night, and the power went out. Everything was pitch black, and the whole grid just shut down. And we have a pretty great view of part of San Francisco into the Daly City skyline, and it was just black all the way to Daly City. So obviously our parents called the power company, and they said the power wouldn't be on for at least 2.5 or 3 hours. That was just how extensive it was. Now that my mother decided to call the theater in Daly City, the big theater that we often like to go to, and they asked if they had power and if Bond was going to be shown. They said it was, in about 45 minutes from then. So our parents put big smiles on their faces, and with the flashlights said, "Boys, grab your coats, we're going to go see James Bond." And my brother and I were so excited. Not only were we kind of caught up in the kind of excitement that a blackout brings, we were really excited because, hey, we get to go see James Bond, and it was a school night. It was so much fun. We got our big popcorn and sodas, and we sat down. And we just really loved Die Another Day. We were really taken in with it. Like I said, because it was big, over the top, and fun, and we were just kind of getting used to the Bond movies a little bit, and we were kind of at the age where those were very appealing. And I remember telling our friends about it, and they loved it too. But of course, sometimes when you're a kid, your parents go back and read the reviews in the date book, and I remember the review wasn't exactly glowing of the film, but somehow it seemed very, very good for us. Now, of course, over the years, I've read a lot of reviews, watched a lot of video reviews that have kind of pointed out the inherent flaws and kind of the miscalculated effort that Die Another Day really is. And I don't know, I still have that soft spot for it because that was, again, the first time I ever saw a James Bond movie in theaters. So obviously I'm going to have a lot of soft spots in my heart for it, a lot of great memories. And what was even funnier is sometimes when my brother and I were sick, we would stay home from school and we would just pop Die Another Day and other Bond films that we had on tape or on DVD, and we just watched those while we were in bed, and it was great. So I'm trying to get that kind of out of my mind, but it's so unique to my experience with Die Another Day that it's hard for me to really kind of bash the movie down, but simply for that reason. But I will give it a try. Die Another Day actually starts off with a bit of a change of pace because James Bond goes into North Korea to try to get information on a diamond smuggling ring, which don't worry, after you guys probably watch what my feelings on diamonds are forever, don't worry, I'm actually okay this time. He winds up getting captured by the North Korean army, and he's tortured for 3 months, and he's thrown back because he's been accused of being a traitor, that he leaked information. So he really does have to go rogue to try to find information about who betrayed him. And it might have something to do with this nouveau riche diamond jeweler named Gustav Graves, played by Toby Stephens, who suddenly has this meteoric rise to fame and wealth, despite his diamonds having a tie with African conflict diamonds. And of course, one twist leads to another, and it turns out that this big, grand, villainous scheme of taking over the world, in a sense that he wants to harness the energy of the sun. Oh my god, I have to use this clip again. In a big satellite, before I really keep going forward, this movie does borrow a lot of elements from previous movies. In fact, because I think this was the 40th anniversary, the writers and the filmmakers really wanted to jam-pack all the references to previous Bonds. They wanted to pick and choose what narrative devices had worked before, because they probably felt at the time, when they were writing the script and producing the film, like, oh, well, this is what audiences have really wanted over the years. This is all the things that they cite as great James Bond material. Now, sometimes the nods are very clever. Sometimes they're little Easter eggs. There's a great scene where Bond visits Q Branch, and Q is fully established, played by John Cleese, taking over from Desmond Llewellyn in The World Is Not Enough. And I always thought he was a fun Q. He never got to stick around and really establish himself. I thought he was obviously, John Cleese is a comedy legend. He's a hero of mine from Monty Python and A Fish Called Wanda, and of course Fawlty Towers. They had all the great old props and gadgets kind of strewn about Q Branch. You see like an alligator submarine from Octopussy, you see Rosa Kleb's shoe, you see the jetpack from Thunderball, and countless other fun things like that. Now, I think what a lot of people take issue with, and I kind of realized it on this rewatch, that it's a little too forced. The references and the idea of trying to kind of fashion the plot to be a classic James Bond plot, trying to distill the essence of what James Bond is, which is a bit of a foolhardy endeavor for me, because that's almost like trying to distill Shakespeare into one story, and sometimes that could work, but other times it really doesn't. And this time, this really doesn't. It borrows the elements that are a little too over the top and even campy by today's standards, and it makes it even goofier by some of the dialogue that Neil Purvis and Robert Wade came up with are not very good. They're very, very, very corny. Especially the double entendres are especially guilty of being really in your face, not subtle at all. And the actors are even kind of in on the joke a little bit. Halle Berry as Jinx, who I'll talk about in a minute, really tries to lay into the entendres, and she does a little bit too much. I think she sunk her teeth in a little too far.
I take it Mr. Bond's been explaining his Big Bang Theory.
Oh, yeah, I think I got the thrust of it.
Oh, behave. Yeah.
You're almost on the edge of a cringe, but you just think, well, okay, this feels somewhat appropriate. I mean, they've already kind of established the tone is very over the top, and a lot of that comes from, I think, not only the script, but from director Lee Tamahori, who also directed films like Triple X State of the Union and a lot of other action films which are very over the top, very thin on story, and sometimes that over-the-top tone just dominates any potential grounded feeling that it could be inside of the story, but I think his focus was just on trying to make another gigantic, gargantuan bonanza of a Bond film. And I think he really kind of lost his way. And the sad thing is, there are times, very, very few, when he does try to make the performances feel legitimate, like have a touching moment. They come close in one scene when Gustav Graves is revealed to be the man who Bond supposedly killed in the pre-title sequence, gone through gene therapy and plastic surgery to make him look like Toby Stevens, and he's reconnected with his father, who was the general who imprisoned Bond. And there is a clever way to try to give those two characters, and I think Kenneth Tsang, who plays the general, does have the best performance in this movie. He's the only one I feel like who decided, I am not going to spend my time in this movie cracking jokes and kind of go over the top. I feel like there's something here, and I'd like to try to connect with that, and I think he does splendidly. Now, unfortunately, again, that's very few and far between. And this movie, I do want to talk about this. I was going to save a little bit of this later in the video for Casino Royale, but I think it is critical to talk about the reception of this film in particular after this cataclysmic, tragic event of September 11th, 2001. Obviously, 9/11 was an earth-shattering event. Nearly 3,000 people died in the Twin Towers and on United 93 and in the Pentagon. It wasn't just a U.S.-centered event. Even though the event was obviously an attack on the United States, it had global ramifications. And that even tied into the films that Hollywood would be producing. There was a big scramble to re-edit films that possibly had too violent suggestions. Spy films, especially The Bourne Identity, was kind of changed and tweaked a little bit. And unfortunately, this movie was kind of midway through production when this happened, and I don't think they really kind of understood what kind of implications that would have for Bond. So they just decided to keep rolling with this over-the-top, kind of silly bonanza of a film, and they just decide, well, maybe what the audience needs is that old escapism that we provided during the Cold War. Now, the problem is once the film came out, it was highly criticized by fans and critics who felt that this sort of flippant attitude, because this movie does feel very much like a Roger Moore project. And the general consensus is that Bond can no longer function that well in a post 9/11 world. And of course, I'm going to go more into detail about this when it came to Casino Royale. But obviously, when you have that in mind, it does cheapen the experience of Die Another Day just a little bit, because you do see that this movie presents things very black and white. There's no gray areas. There's no, like I said, no subtlety really. And it can come off as very tone deaf for especially contemporary audiences. But I think since time has passed a little bit, there's been a little bit of a reappraisal of films from the early 2000s, especially around this time. Now, Die Another Day has aged a little bit worse because of certain things with the effects and certain choices with the story and dialogue. And with that being said, the cast does give a game effort to try to... Most of them very much feel like they know what kind of movie they're in, and they were really excited to be in this kind of movie. I don't think there was really an attempt to try to force to put meat on the bones. I think they realized that this movie was supposed to be this over-the-top, just escape for 2.5 hours. And they kind of play it accordingly. Pierce, I think, leans into the comedy too, in the same way that Halle Berry leaned into the one-liners. Pierce is really good at the one-liners in this movie. I think he just has too many of them.
So what do predators do when the sun goes down?
They feast like there's no tomorrow.
Shall we shag now or shall we shag later?
Sometimes, too, is he does try to bring that toughness that he had in GoldenEye and the previous films, and sometimes it just feels like, well, Pierce, you got to pick a lane. Pick a lane. You're committed to this or you're just going to have a ball with it. He tries to have it both ways. He tries to have his cake and eat it too. I think all the cast did. Halle Berry was really hot at the time. She just won an Oscar for Monsters Ball, which was a grand performance by Halle Berry. You know, I have to give kudos. And she was in Swordfish. She had been in a lot of films, and she was really the hot ticket. So having her as a Bond girl almost seemed like a no-brainer. I mean, she's obviously extremely talented. She's beautiful. And she has an attitude that was very contemporary for the early 2000s. She does kind of have that... She kind of has a female James Bond swagger in a way. But unfortunately, the script and Tamhori just don't quite know how to exploit that. So she does sometimes come off as a little annoying when she really shouldn't. And the villains, too... Well, rather, the main villain suffers from this. His henchwoman I'm going to talk about in just a second, too. Toby Stephens is a great Shakespearean actor. I saw him in a film adaptation of Twelfth Night, and he was absolutely fantastic. And I've seen him in other projects, and he's a great actor. So this one very much seemed out of his comfort zone. And sadly, I think it was a little too far, because sometimes he captures that kind of, like I said, flippant tone where when he and Bond get into a big sword fight at this club, it's this big over-the-top fight that goes out the door, out the windows, into this giant fountain, and when they're stopped, he says,
"Seems you beat me, Mr. Bond."
You know, he kind of tries to play it a little too... How's the word? I think he's a little too comedic for what this role really was supposed to be. It's...
La la la, weaponry. It's the way to get it done. Weaponry. It's effective and it's fun.
So, as much as I hate to degrade on Toby Stephens a little bit, I think while Gustav Graves is fun, it's just I feel like there was a lot more potential to either make it this super funny villain, just completely lean into the comedy and just let it be fun to match the tone, or try to scale back or try to scale up the drama a little bit more so that there is this underlying darkness underneath that veneer. Now, his henchwoman, I should note, is played by Rosamund Pike. Oh my god. This was actually her first ever feature film, and obviously Rosamund Pike had one of the best performances of the century so far in Gone Girl. I think she should have won the Academy Award for it. And here, for this being her first movie, she plays a character named Miranda Frost, and she really nails that last name. She has this sense of coolness and coldness, and they try to play her as somebody who doesn't like to get into workplace relationships, so obviously that sets up some romantic tension for her and Bond. But unfortunately, they throw that out the window very quickly, because obviously at the time, you know, it was required for Bond to sleep with at least one or two women in the film. Now, that doesn't degrade her performance at all. I think she still is very consistent. She's probably the... I think she and Kenneth Sang, I'd like to correct, I think she and Kenneth Sang really understood the assignment, and so they really played into that. Now, there are things about the action and the stunts that are a little bit hot and cold, which are the gadgets, I think, are kind of cool. They're back with the Aston Martin after the stretch of BMWs, thank God. And they have the Aston Martin Vanquish, which, to a 7-year-old kid in 2002, that was the coolest car you could see on screen. That was just absolutely a blast. And they chock it full of gadgets, you know, machine guns again, rockets, traction wheels, and the pièce de résistance to some, the bane of existence for others, was adaptive camouflage. The car could turn invisible, which in theory is a great idea. Unfortunately, I did realize on this rewatch that it's a little silly to take an invisible car to a snow setting, because much of the film takes place in Iceland, or at least a good portion of the film takes place in Iceland. So, and they put a lot of snow on the ground. That car's going to be seen through its tracks. So it just, they didn't quite think that through. I think they were so excited that they could get the CG to obscure this car. Like Q had a fever dream one night and he decided, oh, the car should be invisible. And now I absolutely love the chase that it has, especially between the newer Jaguar that the henchman Zhao drives, and Zhao's actually kind of cool. In fact, I saw these cars at the Peterson Auto Museum in Los Angeles, and they were so neat to see up close. In fact, of course, here we are again. Here is my Vanquish, as Q says. Aston Martin call it the Vanquish, we call it the Vanish. So here, obviously, in the front, it has some missiles. It has the machine guns here on the roof. And on the tires, you can't really see too well. But they do have little painted bumps where there are traction spikes, which really comes through in a pinch for Bond during the chase. I think the car is very cool. I do think the gadgets are pretty cool. However, with that being said, while the practical stunts are great, the CGI has not aged well. It's not very good. It's a trip to say the least. You know, especially for me who grew up at that time thinking that these were some of the coolest effects you'll ever see, only to go back and think, oh, that's what it looks like? Yeesh. In fact, if you want to see two absolutely brilliant reactions to this scene, you should watch Calvin Dyson's review of Die Another Day. He holds an expression of disbelief that is truly something to behold. It's just perfect. And if you watch a documentary called Everything or Nothing, the story of 007, Pierce Brosnan was asked about this, and when he describes filming that day, this kite surfing scene that a lot of fans really hate.
Right, Brosnan, we're going to do kite surfing. Tsunamis today. Kite surfing, a tsunami. Oh.
Great Scott! Even you know it!
Just the fact that he also knew that this was kind of stupid is just kind of reassures the fans that we're not just being like crybabies, that even he thought it was pretty ridiculous. Of course, we have David Arnold back again, and his orchestral scores are amazing. I hate the song. I don't like Madonna. I never have. I don't think I ever will. So, of course, that song, again, much like All Time High, and now if I tend to skip them, a little bit while I'm watching, like, the films, or even when I'm listening to the music on, like, YouTube or Spotify or something. So, really, the movie is objectively a mixed bag, but it's kind of my mixed bag. You know, like I said, I have such strong nostalgic feelings for this movie, so while, yes, objectively, I do know that it's flawed and it's a little silly, a little too silly for its own good, I like it. I enjoy it. Now, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of audiences didn't, and because of 9/11 and a lot of changing circumstances politically as well as in Hollywood, the producers were at a crossroads, and so it would lead to a major change. If you want to change something and you want to go back and start anew, you have to go back to the beginning. So to preface Casino Royale, I do have to fill in a little bit of the circumstances that were going on, and even the circumstances it took to get this film produced. Because, as I mentioned, talking about Die Another Day, 9/11 occurred during production, and it threw the whole world into a tizzy, and Hollywood was no exception. There was less of an emphasis on silly films and silly explosions, and there was a feeling that art should mirror the mood of the time. Now, eventually, a couple years after, things sort of got back to where things had been before, but not quite in the same way. And Wilson and Broccoli really felt like they were at a huge crossroads. Die Another Day had been summarily rejected by many fans, It was still a great success at the box office, but of course critically and fan reception was not kind to the film. And so they faced a critical decision, which was to start afresh with a new actor or keep going with Pierce for what they were planning to be his fifth. They obviously decided to can Pierce, which he wasn't particularly happy about, but he understood that things had to change, and so he was gracious but still slightly miffed. Now, obviously they had a problem. What do we do? How do we do this? Well, the opportunity actually sort of fell in their lap in the courts, because for years, Eon had tried to purchase back the rights to Casino Royale through other studios which Ian Fleming had sold to before he had ever come across Harry and Cubby. And through a very complicated process, which I really have no time to explain here, the rights were finally reverted back to Eon Productions. Casino Royale, as they say, came home. And so they decided, after reading the book again, they said, why don't we start fresh? Let's more or less wipe the slate clean and start a new timeline. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to Fleming, which Barbara Broccoli had always said Cubby Broccoli had given her the best advice, which was when you're in a fix, go back to Fleming. And so it was decided that Casino Royale would be the next project, and of course there was still speculation if perhaps they'll ask Pierce to come back. But I think they decided that since James Bond in Casino Royale is a slightly wet behind the ears, newly minted 00, that they should go with a younger unknown actor, as they had in the past. The actor they got created a firestorm of controversy, and only because the actor they picked was Daniel Craig. He was blonde, he was blue-eyed, he was slightly small, and according to a lot of people and critics, he was simply not James Bond. And, of course, it stung him in the press, but I think what it did was it forced him to say, okay, I'm really going to step up my game here. I'm going to prove these guys wrong. And for insurance, they once again turned to a director who had saved them big time in the 90s, and that was director Martin Campbell, who had scored a huge hit with GoldenEye. When I saw that Martin Campbell's name was on the credits, I said, oh, I remember this guy. This is going to be good. Folks, not only is this movie good, it is phenomenally great, and it's my favorite. Casino Royale is my favorite James Bond movie. I don't think it's ever really been topped. Skyfall came close, but we're going to talk about that in a few days. Now, why do I really love Casino Royale? Well, at the time when I saw it in the theaters with my brother and my father, we came out of the theater talking about it a little bit. We thought my father said this movie kind of broke the rules a little bit. Now, I didn't quite understand why, because I wasn't super into analyzing the Bond films, but this movie really did play with what a James Bond film could and should have been at this point. It feels like it took a quantum leap beyond Die Another Day and even the films that were coming out in the 90s, which were supposed to be much more modern. This movie does absolutely everything pitch perfect correctly. It has an excellent performance by Daniel Craig as James Bond. I still think it's his best. It has one of the best Bond girls, probably the best Bond girl, up there with Tracy from On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Natalia from GoldenEye. Eva Green was brought in and just absolutely nailed it. The supporting cast is marvelous. The script is perfect. The direction is great. The cinematography is amazing. I've often talked about this with Parker and some of my friends. I still think to this day that this movie deserved nominations at the Oscars. I think it deserved a Best Picture nomination, Campbell for his direction, Craig for Best Actor, Eva Green for Best Actress, the cinematography, sound, editing, score, song, all of it. So, of course, I'm kind of going a little top-heavy with my praise, but once I start to kind of get into the plot and everything, I think you might understand. So we're back at the beginning, and James Bond is a newly minted 00 agent. So that already is a really great start, to see just where Bond came from and how he became the James Bond we all know and love. So the idea of the story is that this international gambler and banker named Le Chiffre, played by Mads Mikkelsen, again, another great villain here, tries to manipulate the stock market by blowing up a prototype airplane, which Bond inadvertently stops. Therefore, he's screwed. He needs money. So he sets up a high-stakes poker blind in Casino Royale in Montenegro, and Bond is sent there on behalf of MI6 to drain Le Chiffre of his money and force him to come under their protection. That already goes right back to basics of Bond getting involved in this sort of international espionage world by means of a classy establishment or a low-key operation. This definitely feels like a very simple plan, but it makes all the more sense because Bond is extremely confident. They realize that he's one of the best card players MI6 has to offer. But with that being said, it's his ego and his arrogance is so plain, and he wears it on his sleeve. He wears it almost like he can't wear a poker face. It creates a lot of tension in these scenes with the poker, and they're playing Texas Hold'em, and I've never been able to master Texas Hold'em at all, despite the better efforts of my brother and my friends trying to teach me. But when you're watching the film, even dummy like me could kind of follow, I see what's going on. And you can see through the editing and the cinematography and the way Craig and Mikkelsen look at each other on the table. They're trying to figure each other out. They're trying to look for the tell. It almost seems like I'm making this out to be a dreary gambling movie, but it's not. They're almost staged very much like action scenes, but very low-key kind of action. And so, again, a lot of character can come through by just how somebody taps their cards or how their chips are stacked. Bond is somebody at the table is very sloppy with their chips. Le Chiffre is very anal obsessive about keeping everything perfectly stacked. Bond throws his chips into the pot. Le Chiffre just pushes them. It gives Martin Campbell really another opportunity to shine in the details of these characters. And normally, Martin Campbell is a very explosive kind of director. He really does seem to go for a lot of big action sequences, but he still has the grasp on character and story that makes the action compelling. I still think one of the greatest action sequences I've ever seen on film is the parkour scene early on in the film when Bond is tailing a suspected terrorist in Madagascar, and they're running around this construction site. Bond hijacks a backhoe. They're climbing up a crane. They jump from cranes. They're hanging onto it. And what made it already singularly different from Die Another Day is it did not rely too much on CGI. Most of these stunts were done real for real. And a lot of the times, Daniel was doing a lot of stunts himself. In fact, the assailant that they're chasing was considered the father of modern parkour. So he's doing much of the stunts himself, and the way they capture it, the way they photograph it, the way they cut it together, it's such an adrenaline rush. And Campbell really keeps that pace up for most of the movie. There's a great scene, marvelous chase through Miami Airport and on the tarmac when Bond is trying to stop the bomb from detonating this prototype airplane and killing a lot of people in the stands. He's trying to stop this truck, and he's getting thrown around, and the truck crashes through the baggage trolleys. The cops are after him, and the jet engines blow the cars away. It's such a great, fun scene, but it never comes off as silly. It's photographed in a very kind of muted color scheme, and the camera's always moving. Phil Mayhew did a brilliant job. He should have been nominated for cinematography. I swear, he was a master at this point. And again, it all serves through character, because when the camera is on the actors, you see their thought process. You get what they're thinking, how they're reacting to something. Especially Craig. Like a lot of people have criticized Daniel Craig for being a kind of mono-face actor with really only one facial expression. He does get to shine in this movie. He has some great reactions to what's going on. He gets to parse out a lot of things that are going to happen, which you didn't really see Bond get to do in a lot of the older films. I think the one who really kind of got closest to it was Dalton. Whereas Sean kind of always had the confidence, Roger kind of went with the flow. Dalton was very much a thinking actor, and Pierce, Project Depending, could capture that. But I think Daniel really locked into Bond being much smarter than people give him credit for. And so at the end of the sequence, when the assailant gives a very smug smile, he thinks he succeeded, and he starts to set off the bomb. You see the panic in his face when he realizes that the beeping of the bomb is a little too close to him, and he sees that Bond put it on the belt. He blows up, and Bond just gives a soft little smile. Just like that. It's a terrific performance by Craig, and Craig is also no slouch in the drama department in this movie, because when Vesper enters the picture, sparks just fly between these two, like almost like somebody turned the switch on.
I'm the money.
Every penny of it.
The Treasury has agreed to stake you in the game.
Vesper. I do hope you gave your parents hell for that.
Oh, that's so good. And especially because they were starting anew, they decided to go back to how Fleming had written Vesper Lynd, and also add a little bit of a modern twist to it, because Vesper, as modern as she was back in 1953, she still succumbed to a couple tropes which were seen as giving the lady something feminine to do, even if it wasn't called for. In this movie, Eva Green really plays this woman as a very no-nonsense modern career woman who really doesn't like putting up with Bond's attitude. I really love their dynamic. As she's very much wise beyond her years, and she's got this power over James that he can't quite put his finger on, but it's exciting for him, and she even finds herself being excited by it too. And one of the most romantic scenes in the movie, one that I actually get a tear in my eye when I think about it, is after Bond takes care of some villains trying to take out Le Chiffre, and Vesper helps him kill the other one. He comes back to the room during a break, and he hears the shower running, and he's about to pull out his gun, but he sees Vesper's in the shower. She still has her dress on. She's shivering, and he just, instead of cracking a joke or talking to her, he just walks in and just sits down next to her. He starts to untie his tie, and she just kind of buries her head in his shoulder, and he just kind of sits there and helps. For me, that's best picture quality material that this movie, more often than not, truly exudes. Is they really wanted to show a truly different side of Bond, a more compassionate Bond that we really haven't seen since Our Honor Majesty's Secret Service. And Craig and Eva Green sell it so well. They just feel like they're totally in control. They know what they're doing. It leads to that twist that carries over from Fleming, that Bond was being played by a fool from the start from Vesper. She winds up betraying him at the very end, and it leads to her death. Now, in the book, it was very much like he found her once he found out, and she had taken a cyanide pill, which was sad, but it wasn't particularly tragic in the sense that, like, Tracy would be in the follow-up books. In this case, they changed it to an action sequence in a Venetian building that's being held up by big diesel and airbags that keep getting blown up, and so the house is starting to sink into the canal. And she gets locked in a elevator, one of those old style elevators with the gates that Bond just can't quite get into, and she lets herself drown, and Bond is just freaking out. He's trying to get to her, and Green just absolutely broke my heart in this moment, because yes, she's holding onto the bar trying to let herself drown, but she makes this really stunning choice where she opens her eyes and she reaches out for James, like, help me, I've made a mistake. And of course it's too late and she passes. And Craig did what Lazenby wasn't allowed to do in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. When Craig tries to revive her, and it's just obvious that she's not going to come back, he sits back, he's hyperventilating, he's angry, he's heartbroken, he's got red tears in his eyes. You would never, at that time, I was really stunned in the theater. I just thought, a lot of the James Bond films obviously don't do. So this time it was so, what great confidence the producers had with the script to say, yes, we're going to do this. And not care about what had come before, or maybe care about what had come before, but not be intimidated by it. Like, I think a lot of the films of the 80s and 90s, they were very much intimidated by the past. I think this film did embrace what Bond was, but they said we have to try something different because, again, we're in a different world. We are in a more violent world. It's not black and white anymore. There's a lot of gray shadows, and I think this movie really shows that indeed Bond is in a very shadowy world. He's always looking over his shoulder, because you never know if an ally could betray you, or if an enemy may try to parlay with you. It's a really great choice, and of course, like I said, on a technical level, the film is gorgeously photographed. I think this is some of the best cinematography since like Spy Who Loved Me and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. This just had, and again, also GoldenEye too, because this was the same director of photography, Phil Mayhew. And they brought in a legendary editor, Stuart Baird, who has such a great style of cutting his films. I just thought this was one of the best edited of the pictures. And David Arnold was still retained, even though a lot of things were trying to do something new. Arnold was still kept on because he still had the grand Bond sound, but I didn't realize this really until this last rewatch, is he almost never plays the James Bond film in full, the Bond theme in full. He kind of teases it a little bit, but he still develops his own score as if it was like an independent project. And it's such a great score, and of course, it has one of the absolute best Bond songs in there. I've been saying that a lot on this list. Well, maybe not too much. This song by Chris Cornell, You Know My Name, again, should have been nominated for an Academy Award. I think it's a great song, and it perfectly captured the theme of the picture. You know, if you listen to the lyrics on this song, you realize that it really captures of what Bond is, and it almost serves as a warning to Bond in a subliminal way, like, hey, yeah, you're a 00, but just watch out, you know, this is a dangerous world. And even signals to the audience that things are not going to be quite the same. So really, and also I really got to talk about the villain, because much like Goldfinger, we're kind of back at not quite a private citizen, but, you know, he's very much a worldwide based criminal. But I do kind of think it gives Le Chiffre a little bit more of a human edge, that he's a desperate man, that he's lost all these criminals' money and he really needs to get it back quick because they want their money back and he can't do it. It kind of makes him a little more dangerous in the fact that, you know, if you corner an animal or if you corner a person, they're more dangerous because they're going to come out fighting. They're going to be more dangerous. And Le Chiffre definitely owns what may be the most gruesome torture scene in all of Bond. There aren't many of them, but it was lifted directly from Fleming's book, only the difference was instead of a instead of a racket, it's just this rope with a knot tied on the end. And it didn't matter how old you were in the theater. Every man, every time they watch this scene, just groans. It's so visceral, and it's so shocking to see this in a Bond film. You know, even watching this, I think I think every man will just go, ooh. You know, I think women may too, but for guys it's just a little more visceral. So, you know, when we came out of the theater, we were raving about it. We loved it, but for me, it took at least a year until it came out on DVD because I couldn't quite put my finger as to why it was so great. I knew I really liked it, but I thought, well, why do I like it? I mean, this doesn't happen. There's no Q. There's no gadget-laden car. There's no, exploding pens or things like that. I thought, this movie doesn't have a lot of what I'm used to, so why do I love it so much? Well, again, when I rewatched it on DVD and I realized, I said, I think that's kind of why I like it. It is so different. And they really wanted to experiment more with character than they ever have. And unfortunately, I think we'll see in the next video, I think they tried to go too far in a few spots. But that's really only safe for Spectre and beyond. But Casino Royale is definitely, for me, the cream of the crop of James Bond. It's my favorite. I think it's the best. It's severely underrated, I think, nowadays compared to films like Skyfall. But, yeah. This is my favorite one, and it will always be my favorite one. Skyfall came close to challenging it, but I'll talk a little bit about Skyfall in the next video. But this is almost a requirement now, but I would like to toast my favorite James Bond picture of all time. And on to the next film.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
I've been thinking, I'm feeling really good after Casino Royale, and I'm sure the producers must have felt the same way because they actually did launch an Oscar campaign for Bond. It wasn't successful. I'm shocked by that still. And
nothing can go wrong. Oh no, it all went wrong.
Oh boy, it's Quantum of Solace.
Not the ringer with the slick trigger finger for a magic.
Well, we literally went from my favorite Bond film to my most hated Bond film. Quantum of Solace. So, a lot of you already may know that Parker and I covered this on our podcast way back in the day for Jim and Parker's Bogus Ramblings. And so, really, I was not looking forward to this. I knew it was coming, and I was dreading it. And again, it feels a little bit like Diamonds Are Forever in the sense that it came off the heels of one of my favorite Bond films, a Bond film that took risks. This one, I guess, does take risks still, but not quite. How shall I put it? The risks that they took didn't pay off, or they felt very hollow. I think they were very drunk off the success of Casino Royale, and they just wanted to try a little bit more. Unfortunately, a lot of things did go wrong, and I'll do a little sum up. This film was produced during the Writers Guild strike, so they couldn't ask for a better script. Mark Forster and Daniel Craig would often have to write pages on the day or the night before to just kind of spice things up or get things going. Mark Forster is very much a artistic director who completely ill-equipped for this movie. I really harped on the editing in Jim and Parker's Bogus Ramblings. I think the editing in this movie is absolutely atrocious. some of the worst I've ever seen in a mainstream feature. Now, I would like to add that sometimes when you get a brief, like, I decided to experiment a little bit on this one, like when I was rewatching, because I would hit pause, or I would try to do some slow motion and try to analyze the setups to see if even the setups could have been redeemed if it hadn't been for the editing. And not really. There were a couple shots where it felt like, oh, this is a really great shot. I wish they kind of went a couple seconds more. But really, I think Forster was very uncomfortable with the idea of an action picture, so he tried to make it very much give it an artistic bent, by using a lot of elliptical editing, a lot of flash cutting, and trying to insert shots by trying to create symbolism.
It's metaphorical!
Which came off as very pretentious and very stodgy. And so it gave the film a very bad visual taste, and like I said, the editing did not help. So this movie's also very much a disappointing movie because we were going to find out what this organization that Vesper was possibly connected to, was this the precursor to Spectre? Is this the modern Spectre? Are we just going to call it something else? There were a lot of questions going into it, and while they didn't really answer it too much, or if they did, they weren't very satisfactory answers. We see a lot of kind of modern political sense of monopolies and governments trying to deal with one another. It's in a very delicate balance. Guys, I forgot David Harbour was in this movie. He plays Felix Leiter's boss in the CIA. And I was like, how did I miss him? Oh yeah, he doesn't come off very strongly because most of his scenes are very brief. And again, Felix Leiter is played by Jeffrey Wright in this movie, and he repeated from Casino Royale, and he was fantastic in that one as well, I should mention. But this time, the actors, I think they really were truly cut off at the legs as far as their arcs and their development was concerned because of the writer strike and kind of the inability to have writers on the set to really kind of officially help the film. Now, unfortunately, I think the premise was flawed from the start. The way that the premise was executed was flawed. And so they're really, I won't really go on too much about this one. This is going to be a very short portion. Because, like I said, if you really want to know my full thoughts, you can go watch Jim and Parker's Bogus Ramblings. I keep trying to see the good in this movie. I just can't. Craig gives a game effort, I suppose, but I think any kind of revenge characterization has a firm footing on paper. But in this case, it didn't work out very well because none of the actors or even the director really truly knew how to get to certain parts of the story naturally. I think there was very much confusion behind the scenes. And it just reeks on screen of confusion and slapdash. Again, this movie tried to go 2 years after the previous film, which is what they've been doing since the 60s, a little bit of that hiccup in 73, 74 with Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun. This feels very much like my modern Man with the Golden Gun. The elements are there that could have made for a solid follow-up to Casino Royale, but because of the rush nature of production, the lack of a formal script, the lack of a focus, really crippled the movie, and it's almost irredeemable. It's irredeemably crippled for me. Again, like I said, I do not enjoy this movie. I think it's the worst James Bond film there is because it's not very good and it's not very exciting. What little there is pretentious and sloppy. If there were some things that I could give some praise to, again, I think I would give a little bit of praise to Olga Kurylenko, who has a great setup for the character. Now, it more or less does pay off. I think that they were more focused on giving Camille Montez the emotional edge over Bond, which is kind of silly compared to what had come before. And she does pull it off. I mean, she is a good actress, and she is stunningly beautiful. Oh my God. So it was always a joy to see her on screen, and sometimes you did get the sense like, oh, I do enjoy feeling what she's going through. But, yeah, the villain is awful. Matthew Almeric is Dominic Green. You know, there's a key detail in Spectre. There's a key scene in Spectre where Bond is being mocked by Blofeld with pictures of the past because it's just too good. Dominic Green is nowhere to be seen. And I just think that even the filmmakers knew that they really botched this. And Matthew Almeric is, like I said in the podcast episode, he's a good actor. I've seen him in other things. Dominic Green just does not do anything for me. Another thing, too, was in 2008, there was this the political landscape was changing. Die Another Day and Casino Royale were produced during the Bush administration, and we were in an election year in 2008, so things were kind of changing in how government was being portrayed on film, and I think that started to seep in a little bit in this movie. I think they did want to try to talk about the, how countries trade and barter and try to create monopolies and control oil and water, which I'm going to say this, that could have made a really fascinating hook for this film because it's still such a present problem in 2022. But again, they just could not focus enough on it. It's there. I honestly think that it's there just so they could get brownie points from critics to say, oh, look, they're actually addressing modern political stuff again. But they didn't do it well enough for even me to kind of accept that. It just feels like window dressing a little bit compared to the revenge story. And obviously the Bond going out for revenge, going rogue for revenge, done much, much better back in License to Kill. Because they at least took the time to explore the ramifications. Bond gets in trouble with M a lot in this movie, and Judi Dench doesn't get much to do. Even though she's out in the field a lot, it just feels more like an annoyance rather than, oh, this is really fascinating. Why is M here? And she did a great job in Casino Royale too. There was a nice balance. But, yeah, this just doesn't work for me. I really, truly watch it when I do an official marathon. And even then, I'm really fast-forwarding through a lot of scenes. I just think, oh, God, just get me to this. And sadly, like I said, sometimes the action does feel like it's going to kick off. And sometimes there are moments where I think, oh, okay, this will be really cool. They can't focus on it for less than a microsecond. So it just, yeah. Bad marks. I think I give this film a 3 out of 10 in my sincerest and most honest appraisal of this movie. So what a sour note to kind of pop the balloon that was Casino Royale, because it would take a long time. The producers had to regroup after this. They really had to say, okay, we screwed up again. How are we going to fix this? Because obviously we did something with Casino Royale. So they really decided to sit down and say, what is the audience looking for nowadays? Like, what do they like? What was special about this one? And how can we build on that? And of course, in the next video in a few days, we're going to see both the peak of what they could do after Casino Royale and the deepest valley of what they could do after Casino Royale with Spectre and Skyfall. So with that, messed that one up there. Well, I will end the video by saying thanks for joining. Obviously, I would say obviously go see Casino Royale. Die Another Day is fun. Quantum of Solace. It's not even that vital to the success of Bond. Just skip it.